Hello again, and good morning to everyone. And welcome to probably one of the most awaited sessions for GPC 2020. And we all know that there's a pressing need for us to be updated on the status of the COVID-19 vaccine development. There are several candidate vaccines using various technological platforms, and phase 3 trials are ongoing and hopefully coming to an end soon. In this session, we will hear a report of the candidate vaccines, clearly highlighting where they are, what is in the pipeline, and how we will make these vaccines accessible for all. But before that, I'd like to call on the Director General of the International Federation of Pharmaceutical Manufacturers and Associations, IFPMA, representing the biopharmaceutical industry, Mr. Thomas Cooney. IFPMA is a founding partner of Access to COVID-19 Tools Accelerator, a global collaboration to accelerate the development, production, and equitable access to new COVID-19 diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines. One pillar of Act A is COVAX, a facility co-led by Gavi, the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness, Innovations, and WHO, where the IFPMA is joining efforts to accelerate the development and manufacture of COVID-19 vaccines. 172 economies are now engaged in discussions to potentially participate in COVAX. Mr. Thomas Cooney will give us a broad overview of what to expect in this collaborative effort. Over to you, Thomas.
Thank you very much, Karen, and I hope my microphone works, and I will try to explain to you in 5 minutes what has been done over the last 6 months. It is a unique effort, and I just want to give you a few numbers in terms of explaining the scale. Normally it takes 8 to 12 years to develop a vaccine, a new vaccine. The fastest effort ever, which was unprecedented and unique, was an Ebola vaccine. It took 4 years. Now we are talking about cutting this down to 12 to 18 months. Therefore, in terms of speed, this is unprecedented. Second, in terms of volumes, the highest volume vaccine ever produced so far, if you leave aside seasonal flu shots, to the best of my understanding, is polio, about 450 million doses. For COVID-19, what we know based on initial early phase clinical trials is that most likely you will need 2 doses per person to get the immunization you want, and you don't know yet how long it will last, which means when you look at the global population of 8 billion plus, you need up to 15 billion doses, which means it's not just a question of researching, developing, and manufacturing at great speed, scaling up, bringing it to the people. It's also a question of doing this in numbers, which is unprecedented. Now, the COVAX facility is probably the most important tool and institution in ensuring something which our IFPMA members committed early on, namely to strive and work towards accessible, available, and equitable and affordable, on a global scale, because we all still have some memories of H1N1, the swine flu in 2009, but basically the rich countries bought up all the vaccines and antivirals, and the poor countries were left stranded until the rich countries found out they don't really need all those antivirals and vaccines because H1N1 wasn't as dangerous as was feared. We do not want to see a repetition. And I think one of the important messages and element, many of you, I'm sure, have read the newspapers over the last weeks, watched TV, and are concerned, will there be anything left for me, for example, in the Philippines or in Southeast Asia or in Africa? Or isn't it that basically all what's available for the next 12 to 18 months has been brought up by the US, by the UK, by the EU in bilateral deals. It's interesting that in this coverage, nobody ever talks about China and India, because when I look at it from a COVAX perspective, I haven't heard much about vaccines leaving China before the Chinese population will be immunized. And it's obvious that India too will want to make sure. I think that's understandable. Therefore, many countries are trying, of course, to meet the expectations of their people. What's unique in this collaboration of CEPI, Gavi, WHO, and the private sector. You have IFPMA as a founding partner, but you also have the developing country manufacturer network fully represented. And this is a collective effort of an extent which we haven't seen. Based on what we know now, and we just had 2 days ago, the latest session of the sort of board of COVAX, I think we do stand a good chance that by the end of 2021, COVAX will be able, subject to the vaccines reaching the market approval based on quality, safety, and efficacy tests, reach the target of supplying 2 billion doses of vaccines for the world, half of which are meant for self-funded countries, high-income and upper-middle-income countries, but half of which are meant for low- and middle-income countries. Therefore, this instrument of solidarity, I think we do stand a reasonable chance, because when I look at the COVAX portfolio, it has the most profound, deepest portfolio of vaccine candidates, 9 of them already in phase 2 and phase 3 clinical trials. And some of them are at the stage where you will have results from phase 3 clinical trials with 10,000s of patients sometime end of October, November, which doesn't mean that you have a vaccine yet. I think there are 2 important elements which I want to flag from an IFPMA perspective. We engaged upfront in the COVAX because we are fully committed to the notion of solidarity. And although as industry, we cannot ever commit on, we industry will supply at this or that price, because that is a company decision and there are strict antitrust rules which forbid us from talking about this. Every single company which you have here on the panel is committed to something which you can call socially responsible, some of them not for profit, all of them really committed to the notion of solidarity. And the examples of Pfizer, GSK, J&J and MSD, they are just some examples of the innovative manufacturers. But what's also unique in this COVAX, when I talk to the leaders of the developing country manufacturer network, they're absolutely aligned. They work hand in hand with our experts. And I will not go into any details on the vaccines, because Thomas, Gerald and Steve and Julia, they are the experts, they are the medical experts. But there's one element which I think is really important. All the companies are firmly committed to doing this at great speed, as fast as possible, but as slow as necessary. Recently, I've seen concerns about regulatory agencies being coerced by political pressure, about getting approval before you really had full safety data. All the companies have recently come up with either individual or collective statements. They do not want to have their vaccines approved unless you have solid, validated data based on phase 3, including a commitment. For example, we only 10 days ago had a media briefing on, among others, vaccine development, subjecting to an independent expert advisory committee of FDA, and they're really committed. We do not want to run the risks, to cut corners. We want to be sure that whatever reaches patients does meet the highest standards of quality, safety, and efficacy. I think that's an important element. The second important element is, in order for this objective, the ambitious objective to be fulfilled, you need the solidarity of rich countries with poorer countries. That's why COVAX and we, over the last few weeks, we worked a lot talking also to rich countries, because them buying into COVAX will allow the facility to cross-subsidize countries which will need overseas development assistance, which can't, afford even to pay a not-for-profit price. And I think I'm much more optimistic today, by the way, than I would have been even 2-3 weeks ago. You mentioned 172 countries. My understanding is we are now talking about 185, and 13 additional ones are basically all rich countries signing up to COVAX. Now, there's one element in terms of expectation management. We do know that even with the best intentions, we will not have sufficient quantity of vaccines next year to vaccinate everybody. Therefore, the allocation principle, which has been worked out by WHO, but signed up by everybody, is that through COVAX, you want to supply ideally at least priority 20% of population. Why 20%? You go for 1%, that's the healthcare workers, the frontline workers. 8% is the elderly above 65. And with the 20%, you can cover other priority areas such as multimorbidity. We do know that diabetes, obesity, heart disease is a risk factor. And therefore, if we can meet that, I think it would be a fantastic achievement. It doesn't mean that you will forego bilateralism, whether it's in Russia, China, or the US. I think that's the reality, and we shouldn't kid ourselves. But we are in there for serious effort and in a partnership where I'm really proud what the colleagues from the companies who are all working 24/7 are doing. I'm looking forward to the discussion and look forward to wrapping up in about an hour. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. That was really helpful, talking about the broad collaboration, and it's really daunting, the need to supply those many billions of doses. So now I'd like to call on the individual companies, and I have the distinct pleasure of introducing their presenters. I'll start alphabetically. So I'd like to start with Dr. Thomas Boyer. He is the Senior Vice President in Vaccines Research and Development of GSK. So over to you, Thomas.
Okay, so welcome.
Yes, I'll give each of the presenters 3 minutes to talk about your vaccines. Thank you.
Yeah. So welcome everyone. Thanks for having dialed into this session. We were all asked to briefly describe what each and every company is doing. However, the first statement, I want to repeat what the other Thomas just said, is there's no way one company can supply the entire world. So several, if not many companies actually have succeeded to have a supply of potentially several billion doses. So normally we are in fierce competition, but this time it is really that I wish my competitors luck in succeeding in their efforts. So from a GSK point of view, even though we are one of the largest vaccine companies, we decided early on not to develop our own vaccine, but rather work with other companies by providing a key ingredient, which is for protein-based vaccines very important, which are called adjuvants. Adjuvants have two features. A, they create a much stronger immune response, which is especially important for the older population where the immune system is not working as well as in younger people anymore. And it has something which is called dose sparing. So you need less vaccine in one dose and therefore can produce more vaccine. So we are working with several collaborators. To give you one example, we work with Sanofi, one of our main competitors, but currently we are working together on one vaccine. And the reason we are working with Sanofi is they have a platform to mass produce the vaccine, and we have a platform to mass produce the adjuvant. And so bringing these two elements together because both companies are committed to produce vaccine at scale. So GSK, for example, will produce 1 billion doses of adjuvant next year. And this obviously has to be matched with our collaborators. GSK and Sanofi also have a long history to not just provide vaccine to the developed world, but also to Gavi, the developing world, with a tiered pricing approach. And we are in a close conversation with the accelerator, with COVAX, to see how we can contribute over there. We also work with other companies. We work with a Chinese company called Clover. We work with a Canadian company called Medicago. They're all in various stages of development, and we are really hopeful that our own work with these collaborators on a protein-based adjuvanted vaccine will contribute to a solution to the COVID pandemic at scale. So let me stop there and give the other speakers time to comment as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Thomas. So next presenter is Dr. Jerry Sadoff. He's the Senior Advisor, Clinical Vaccine Development of Infectious Diseases and Vaccines of Janssen. So over to you, Dr. Gerald.
Hello, it's a real pleasure to be here. I want to echo what Thomas just said. This is probably one of the first times in my 45 years in the vaccine industry that we've actually been cheering on for the other companies as well as ourselves, because this is an effort that is very, very important for the entire world, and we want everyone to be successful so that we can supply enough vaccine for everyone that needs it. Our program is based on a non-replicating common upper respiratory infection virus called Ad26. And we've used this in a number of our vaccines, RSV and HIV and Ebola. And we've been into over 110,000 people with this vector, and it's licensed for Ebola. So we feel very comfortable about the safety of this non-replicating viral vector that we put the gene for a S protein into from the virus that we're talking about, and this is a stabilized protein. What we started, we did a series of preclinical studies in non-human primates, which are ongoing, as well as hamsters, and we were very gratified that after one dose of our vaccine in the non-human primates, we had 100% protection against lower lung disease in terms of replicating virus, and almost complete protection against upper respiratory. We also found the same thing in hamsters. And so we had some idea that the vaccine, at least to the extent that these animal models show, would work. We started our phase 1/2 trial, which is, it's a very large trial. It's going to have over 1,000 subjects. We've got over 800 enrolled now in July. And we just received the results in the last few weeks from the first cohort and the second and the third cohort, those aged 18 to 55 and greater than 65. And what we found was that we had a very good immune response to a single dose, and that we had a dose response where we had higher and lower doses, and we found that they were about the same. So we picked the lower dose. And so we feel that our one-dose vaccine has a very good chance of being successful, to the extent that we're planning to start our phase 3 trial in over 60,000 subjects next week in the United States, in South Africa, and many countries in South America. And we may go also to countries in Europe and the Philippines. So we're starting our phase 3 trial, which will enroll both younger adults and elderly. We start out with a couple thousand subjects in each of those groups that don't have comorbidities that lead to rapid development of COVID. And then after that, the rest of them all have the kind of comorbidities that Thomas was talking about. So we're hoping to have results between sometime late December and March, and we're committed to providing 1 billion doses of vaccine in the near future. So that I hope that gives a brief summary of where we stand. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gerald. We'll circle back to some of the other questions later on. I'll now call on Dr. Julia Spencer. She is the Associate Vice President for Global Vaccines, Public Policy, Partnerships, and Government Affairs for MSD, where she leads the efforts to sustain and expand access to MSD vaccines and strengthen the immunization systems delivering this. Over to you, Dr. Julia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen, and thanks to IAPO for inviting me to join this illustrious panel today. It's not often that we get to come together as industry and to really cheer each other on, as my colleagues have said. So, we have taken a slightly different route in our development programs, where we actually are moving forward with 2 vaccine candidates. We looked around inside our organization and talked to a number of partners, really trying to understand what we believed would be the best technologies that might come forward as solutions. And so we are working right now on what we are calling our V590 program and our V591 program. Our V590 program is through a partnership with the nonprofit IAVI. And that is actually using the same RVSV platform that we utilize for our recently approved Ebola Zaire vaccine, or VIVO. And we feel really optimistic about what we may be able to accomplish with this platform. It is a proven replicating viral vector platform. And then we also, through our acquisition and a partnership with Themis, have started development on another replicating viral vector platform using the measles vector. And again, this is the measles vector is a proven vector that has been characterized by more than 50 years of clinical safety and over 1 billion vaccinated, and typically confers long-term protection. We believe that even though we are a bit further behind in terms of our programs, that multiple vaccines will likely be needed, and we feel very strongly about the promise of these candidates. Importantly, we just started phase 1 for our V591 program, and we will be beginning our phase 1 in the 4th quarter of 2020 for our V590 program, with the anticipation of being in phase 3 for both programs in 2021. I did want to spend just a couple of minutes that I have also talking about what we are doing in terms of our clinical studies to ensure that we are getting not just the participants that we will need to study our programs at scale, but also doing it in a way so that we are ensuring that we have diversity among our participants in our clinical development programs. And so we are doing a number of things to ensure that that minority populations, as well as diverse populations across the globe, are recruited and are participating in our clinical development programs. And we believe that this is important for a number of reasons. One, it helps to build trust and confidence amongst the participants and the communities from which those participants come. And it also ensures that, that people understand how these vaccines are being developed. And I think, as all of us will be talking about shortly, there's a lot of concern around vaccine hesitancy. And the more that we can do to share information with diverse populations as we develop these vaccines, I think we will all be better off in terms of ultimately the uptake of these vaccines that that we all want at the end of the day.
Thank you, Dr. Julia. So The next presenter is Dr. Steve Lockhart, Vice President, Head of Europe and Asia Pacific for Vaccine Clinical Research and Development for Pfizer. Over to you, Dr. Steve.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm really encouraged to see the broad spectrum of different vaccines being developed because, frankly, at this stage, we don't know which ones are going to work and what problems might arise anywhere in the development program or the manufacturing or in other areas. So it's really very encouraging. So Pfizer is working very closely with a company called BioNTech. BioNTech has spent almost a decade developing what's called the mRNA platform for vaccines. The way that works is, I think we all know that DNA carries the codes for our proteins. DNA is then used by the body to make RNA, and RNA is then directly involved in making the proteins in our cells. So we're taking advantage of that by injecting the RNA. It's taken up into the cells and will then make the protein. I think we're all working on a similar target. It's really the spike protein, which is the little bit that makes the coronavirus halo, and which is used by the virus to attach to human cells and thus enter the body. So with our vaccine, that's expressed then, the RNA is expressed inside the cell, which then makes the protein, which enables the body to make an antibody response and also a cellular response to that particular protein. We've reached a point now where we've demonstrated in humans that we can make that antibody, that it's reasonably well tolerated as a vaccine, but also importantly, that we make exactly the type of cellular mediated response and immune response that is required to enhance the probability of a good outcome. My colleagues are working on similar things, so we're all going down similar pathways. We've shown also in non-human primates that we get very good protection from infection. And we're now advanced into a phase 3 study. We've currently enrolled around 29,000 subjects. We've recently announced an increase in that to 44,000 because we see in some of the trial sites, particularly in the US, the rates of disease falling, which is exactly why J&J are starting their trial with 60,000. So this is not some sort of competition. This is simply to get the right number of subjects so we see the right number of cases, because ultimately the one commitment that Pfizer has is that we will apply all our normal quality and safety standards. And I think the pledge from the other companies is similar. We want to produce a safe and effective vaccine. We don't want to cut any corners. We're not cutting any corners. We're going to do everything exactly as we always would. And we're working very closely with the regulators to make sure that we achieve the high standards that they're expecting. So I'll leave it now. We'll come back a little bit later, I think, to some of the other aspects of the trial.
Thank you so much. So we can all see the various stages and the various technologies that each of the companies are employing for the COVID vaccine development. And we all know that an effective vaccine is not the end, right? Vaccines tested on individuals need further efficacy and safety evaluation, especially those who are vulnerable. Part of the challenge is also the need to address the growing vaccine hesitancy. As it is, there are a lot of anti-vaxxers, and this has the potential to negatively impact the introduction of the vaccine and impact confidence and uptake of other vaccines. So we'd like to just go around and ask our panelists some of the questions relating to these issues. First, I'd like to address it to Dr. Lockhart. What about the status of your patient enrollments? You mentioned how many thousands? 29,000 currently in phase 3 trials. How easy or difficult was it to recruit patients?
Well, I think we've actually found centers. We have a number of centers across the US and now in Brazil and Argentina. And I think we have been able to enroll a reasonable number of subjects. We have, I think it's about 10% healthcare workers, and the majority of subjects are people exposed to the virus on a fairly regular basis in the nature of their work and their daily life. Importantly, was mentioned the racial and ethnic minorities. And there we are, to be honest, we're a little bit behind in our target for enrolling African American subjects and Black subjects in other countries. And we're focusing very hard on that. And part of the reason for enrolling more subjects is so that we can try and enhance our efforts to get people from those more vulnerable communities. We've also recently, we're just introducing an amendment so that we can enroll subjects, for example, with HIV infection, hepatitis B, hepatitis C. These are all subjects who are routinely often left out of vaccine trials, and we feel it's important, certainly where they're well controlled. We're not going to take people with very active disease, but a lot of subjects with HIV are now very well controlled, and we feel that those sorts of chronic conditions are important to enroll into our studies so that these people have the right, really, to protection once vaccines become available. The expansion into other countries has also been important. So while we've started in the US and the majority of our enrollment is currently in the US, we do see the disease to some extent coming under control there, but very rife in certain other countries still. We've got enrollment in Brazil and in Argentina, where particularly in Buenos Aires, the disease is quite prevalent. And we will soon be expanding to include South Africa. As well as Germany and Turkey. So we want to see a wide global assessment of the vaccine.
Thank you very much. For Dr. Gerald, I noticed the diversity by which you recruited patients for the trials. What were the factors you considered in choosing the countries where you conducted these trials?
Yes, we are very committed, as the other companies are, to having diverse representation in our trials because we think that's the right thing to do. And also these are the people that have the most burden of disease in many cases, or higher burdens of disease. So we want to make sure that our vaccine would work in those situations. We felt that if we went early on to South Africa and South America, as well as attempting to have a diverse population in the United States, we could meet our goals. And also, we are guided also by the incidence rates in the places that we go. We actually, every day, we look at incidence figures in order to target not only the countries, but within the countries where we might go in order to have sites that will have the incidence necessary for us to show that our vaccine works. So we realized quite early that there was going to be quite a bit of disease in South Africa, as well as in South America, in addition to the United States and some of the countries in Europe that we might target. So that was our early goal, and that's what we did. And I must say, having talked to most of the regulatory and IRBs in these countries, they're very enthusiastic about accepting the vaccines. They see the need, and they've been very gracious and helpful in every possible way, but they still have the same standard that I've seen over the years. There aren't any corners being cut, but things are just being done a lot faster and with more intensity. But every country has had very good questions that they've asked that we've tried to answer, and the standards are very high. But we do believe that it's very important to have all different kinds of populations in the different countries that we go to.
Thank you. That's good to know that in terms of the regulatory process, nothing is being shortcutted. So for Dr. Thomas Boyer, where do things stand in terms of being ready to produce the COVID-19 vaccines in the quantities needed?
Yeah, so as several speakers, including myself, already alluded to, if we have successful vaccines, we need a few billion doses. These cannot all be available at the beginning of next year. So I actually believe this will be an activity which has to be spread at least over 2 years. Maybe to use GSK as an example, so we are at risk producing the adjuvant as Sanofi is producing the antigen or the vaccine. And the antigen sparing effect, which I have described in my initial wording, has actually worked, because in the H1N1 pandemic in 2008-9, we could essentially multiply the manufacturing output by 4 by using this adjuvant technology. But, you know, it's one thing to produce, and that applies to all companies on the phone and all the others out there. It's one thing to produce the vaccine, so the fluid, the vaccine itself, but it's another thing to fill it in glass vials, then package it and ship it around the world. And all companies are currently scrambling to find the glass vials to fill this. So maybe another example, GSK produces an amount of roughly 700 million doses of vaccine overall across all the vaccines. Next year, we have committed to not only produce, but finish 1 billion doses of adjuvant, just to give you a feel for these numbers. And this will be achieved by running at full capacity in GSK, but also work with external, what we call contract manufacturers, to help to fill and finish and package all these doses. And this is not just true for GSK, this is true for all the other companies. So from an organizational point of view, this is a massive endeavor, needs lots of coordination between different companies which are specialized in fill and finishing these products. And, you know, I wish people would understand it's one thing to run clinical trials and license a vaccine, but it's a totally different pair of shoes to produce billions of doses across many companies.
Correct. Not just the production, but eventually the acceptance likewise of the vaccine. So I'd like to direct this question to Dr. Julia Spencer. You've been formally with government, and vaccine hesitancy has continued to be a serious barrier in the success of any immunization program. What do you think should be done to prepare the introduction of this vaccine?
So thanks for the question, Karen. And you know, as we all know, the development and manufacturing of a vaccine is only half the solution. You trust in vaccines and in the systems that deliver them is paramount. And I think, you know, this starts with our clinical programs. And we've done a lot of work internally and with organizations like the U.S. Food and Drug Administration and other partners, really thinking about, you know, what words are we using? And understanding that words like clinical trial, even though that's a term of art that we all use in, you know, in our work, the word trial doesn't necessarily have a positive connotation. And so from a health literacy perspective, we've really stepped back and kind of done some self-reflection on what are the words that we need to be using, in addition to what information are we sharing, to ensure that anyone who chooses to participate in a clinical study really understands that, you know, they are a partner in this clinical development program, in addition to being one of you know, thousands of people that is helping to support the development of these products. But I think that's really the first step, is what we're doing and what we need to continue to do as companies. The majority of people believe in vaccination, but there is an increasing vaccine hesitancy, not just in the COVID environment, but more broadly. And I know that you have a lot of personal experience with that in the Philippines, Karen. And part of it is around the resilience and the strength of the systems that are delivering vaccines in addition to the vaccines themselves. And so the entire stakeholder community really plays a critical role in supporting efforts to build those resilient immunization systems that ultimately promote confidence, whether that is government officials who are vocally standing up for and supporting vaccination programs and ensuring that investments are being made in those programs so that you have well-trained vaccinators, you have access points that people feel comfortable going to, you have safety systems that are monitoring the quality of vaccines as they are being administered, you have community leaders and patient advocates and industry and others who are sharing information in transparent ways about vaccines and also about the vaccination system. Ultimately, we need a lot of work now to prepare and strengthen immunization systems to be ready tomorrow to deliver these vaccines. And I worked on pandemic influenza planning when I worked for the US government. It was a daunting task thinking about how to deliver potentially hundreds of millions of doses of vaccines to people. And this is an even more daunting challenge that we have ahead of us in the future, where you're really asking immunization programs that are already under stress, trying to deliver routine immunizations, to expand and to flex and go into hard to reach populations to ensure that everyone who needs a vaccine gets it. We are partnering as MSD as well as through industry on a number of efforts to try to build confidence in the system, but also think about how we can partner with organizations to build the robustness and the resilience of immunization systems so that they can deliver on the promise of the products that we're talking about here today.
Thank you. Thank you, Julia. There's a question on the floor, and I'd like to direct that to Dr. Thomas Weyer. How do you plan to engage patients from low and middle income countries in these clinical trials?
So the trials where GSK is involved with are run by our collaborators, Clover, Medicago, and Sanofi. And the trials are multi-country trials, so they are run all across the world in different geographies: Australia, China, Panama, Brazil, US, and some European countries. So it's a mix of regulatory agencies' desire to recruit patients from their own country. But it's also a function of the current epidemiology. So we have to make sure, if we want to have rapid efficacy results, that these trials are run in areas where you have significantly high incidence of COVID-19, because if you run clinical trials in a COVID-19 high incidence setting, then you have a better chance of collecting cases and have the appropriate numbers together to come to a conclusion on this vaccine. So in short, multi-country trials, all geographies are currently involved.
Okay, thank you. So back to you, Julia. The different CEOs have already committed to strictly following the safety standards in developing the vaccine. What about the commitment to equitable access to the vaccine? What do you think is the role of the patient community in helping ensure that there is equitable access to the vaccine? Please unmute.
Yes, you got very, very small on my screen. Karen, thank you for the question. Where is a millennial when I need one to help me with this? So, it's a critically important question, Karen. And, as Thomas said at the top of the discussion, industry has really come together to ensure that we are standing behind, united, for global equitable access for these vaccines. This is a very challenging thing to be able to accomplish because all governments around the world are trying to ensure that their populations have the vaccines that they need. And as Thomas also said, there is a history of inequitable access that we saw with the H1N1 pandemic about a decade ago, and none of us wants that to happen again. And one of the key ways that global equitable access can be achieved is through participation in some of these global systems, such as the ACT Accelerator COVAX facility. So as a company, as well as industry, we are fully engaged in discussions, and it's been amazing to see over the course of just a few months, the ability of global partners to come together to be able to achieve a joint procurement mechanism like we've never seen before for a pandemic. And so we will continue to engage through these as our primary objectives as a company. And we will also ensure that, you know, the economics of our programs enable us to achieve that global, equitable, and affordable access of any vaccines that we do bring forward.
Thank you so much. We're running out of time. It's a pity because we still have questions. However, I'd like to just give the last minute to Thomas Cooney because I wanted to ask for myself, which vaccine do you think is the best and how early can the population expect the vaccine?
Yeah, I'm not a millennial, but I found the mic. It's the billion-dollar question, and I have to admit I've been working with the industry for so many years that I'm not sure that the first one will be the best. Actually, when you look at which medicines are normally the most successful, it's the early followers rather than the first one. I hope that we will have quite a number of vaccines which will be effective and safe. And I'm reasonably confident because when you listen to our four marvelous experts, you have different approaches from the companies, you have different collaborations between big pharma and big pharma, between also academia and big pharma, and between biotech, but they all basically are looking to try to find a protection against the same virus. And I do believe, based on, I think, what we know, this is not just, you know, SARS, the SARS one wouldn't work, the flu doesn't work, but one does know about, you know, coronaviruses. Therefore, I think there's reason to be cautiously optimistic. I do believe that we are more likely to see serious immunization programs spring to summer next year at the earliest rather than into winter. There, I think I would caution. One can't underestimate the challenges also of logistics, for example, the need for ultra cold chains for some of the viruses. But also because of that, I want to flag what we heard was, I think, an amazing demonstration of how the industry is all in together. We started because we benefit from the normal competition, from the rich innovation ecosystem. But on this one, this industry has come together in partnership, but not just within the industry, but partnership with CEPI, Gavi, with the global communities, and patient involvement and support is necessary. I just want to say that we don't consider people as subjects. We are talking, the reason why there's a bit of hesitation to use the term of patient, because in vaccines you don't enroll patients, you enroll healthy volunteers. And that's why the term patient trial would be wrong. I also want to flag in terms of vaccine confidence. I think we need transparency and openness. The companies in their pledge not just committed to, doing and living up to the highest regulatory standards, but also committed to transparency on good or bad results. And you will read a lot about the outcome of the trials. We also need to talk about the great benefits we all have seen over the last decades through vaccination program. Gavi, which turned 20 this year, has been probably the most effective, biggest impact program in terms of improving global health, and it is a truly collective action where the companies and IFPMA have been involved over the last 20 years, and we need to talk about the benefit of this initiative. And last but not least, since in some of our geographies we are moving towards winter, we will have to wait for, a treatment or vaccine on COVID-19, which is truly effective. Therefore, please make sure that you get your seasonal flu shot, because the worst which could happen to the resilience of our health systems is if you get an overlap between a flu wave in the winter and a, really spike and rise in COVID-19 cases again. Therefore, do as I've done. I'm already registered to get my flu shots, as I've done over the last 25 years. It doesn't help against COVID-19, but it certainly protects you against seasonal flu. And thanks a lot. This was an exciting panel, and thanks a lot to all my colleagues and you who gave us this platform.
Thank you, everyone. I'd like to now turn it over to Kawaldip to just say a few words and to thank our esteemed panelists.
Thank you very much, Karen, and thank you very much, all the panelists. I think the question that you posed to Thomas Queenie, which is your favorite vaccine, I think is like asking a mother, which is your favorite child. As an IFPMA director, I think he answered it very well. They're all his favorite children. Yes, now we will have a mobility break. And I would like to thank the panelists very much, because we were really happy to see you there. I think patients were really pushing me to get this panel together. And I thank all the people who are here, and even those who are waiting in their wings. The response from the industry was so great. They just came forward, and we had to take potluck and draw names out of the straw. And I think, thank you very much for your time and effort, and hope we continued. And we'll meet again next year with the great news that we have beaten it. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so
you,
much.
and goodbye. Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
And the rest of the audience can join the next session after the mobility break. Thank you.